Check, check.
Oh, yes. Good morning. I'd like you to take just a minute and think about something that you personally are absolutely passionate about. Could be dogs, could be music, could be military history. Think about that thing. And now take another minute and think about doing that thing at a traditional encyclopedic art museum. What would that look like? And how would it feel? Who would come to share in this event with you, and what would be the benefit to the museum? This is the work that we developed as part of our project to find innovative ways to move from being a place where teaching happens to a place where learning happens. And the real fundamental shift in this project was that we had to suspend our passion for art and art history. We had to suspend it for a minute to start with the passion that lives in our audience. So here are some examples of what happened in our museum when we worked to figure out how to co-create. As part of our innovation project, we had a small team. Our staff is just over 300. We had a small team of 10 people on an innovation team, and we were charged with the responsibility to go out into the community and talk to community members, talk to our hairdressers, our mechanics, our dry cleaners, our neighbors, and ask them what their passion was, and then ask them to imagine their passion at the museum. In our Dogs on the Lawn event, we partnered with some really dog-crazy people who also happened to be students at our local college. And together we created a dog event that allowed people to bring their dogs to the art museum, to our sculpture park, and to engage their dogs in art and in fun. So you can see there were some really ridiculous photo opportunities. The art students came up with 6 ways you could change an old t-shirt into a costume for your dog, for your super dog, or for your diva dog. You could screen paint, I work for bacon, whatever you want, on the costumes. And people had their dogs make art that they took home and put on their refrigerator. So people became engaged in our sculpture park in a way that was meaningful to them and in a way that built relationships for us. The project, you might wonder, well, why is this important to a big museum? Well, the project started as a way to help the museum understand how to remain relevant in a seriously changing world. This slide, which is adapted from the Center for the Future of Museums, demonstrates how eras of education are changing. So education started as an apprenticeship where the curriculum was local, depended on what you were going to do. Your teacher was your elder. It was very class-based. What you would do as an occupation, what you would learn to do, had everything to do with where in society you were born. Then there was a huge disruption. Books were printed, the Industrial Revolution happened, and education had to shift to become an institutionalized product where there are classrooms, the curriculum is based on your grade level, teaching was a profession. And we're now in the middle. This is the model that most of us experienced and went to school with. And we're now in the midst of a new disruption. I personally feel we're over the edge. We're just trying to catch up with it. The disruption being technology and moving to a knowledge era. And we're now in the era of the learner, where lifelong learning happens beyond the walls of institutions, where university courses are free, where they're global, where learning is mediated by software, and in a case in which the teacher, in our case cultural organizations, must act as a facilitator. So if you think about the change in education, we also have to think about the connection between responsibility and authority. When my grandmother went to the doctor told my grandmother exactly what to do. She didn't even question it. She went home and did whatever the doctor told her to do. If you or I have a medical problem, we still want expertise. We still go to find out what the expert has to say, but we don't imbue that expert with the same authority that my grandmother did. We go to another doctor and get a second opinion. We go to WebMD, find out what we want, and we maintain the authority to make decisions for our health care. So if authority is no longer automatically vested in the expert, and museums love to be the expert, but rather expertise is sought to inform one's own authority, And if learning's become decentralized, no longer organized and controlled by large institutions, but rather by the learning themselves, then what's a large, expert, centralized museum to do in this world? So we had to try and find new behaviors to navigate this change and to stay relevant to our community. We needed to move into a relationship that was about being a learning partner, sharing in the joy and the wonder and the messiness of learning, being willing to learn as much as our visitors, being willing to listen as much as we talked. So there were sort of three key lessons. As I said, the first one was it's not about our passion all the time, it's also about their passion. When we first started talking to community members, we just said, what wild and crazy thing would you love to do at the Nelson-Atkins? And we got really boring, sort of disappointing responses because people's responses were shaped by years of experience with a very traditional art museum. So we had to even flip the invitation around and start with people, start with what they were passionate about, and then how can you imagine doing that at the museum? So this is 380 people doing yoga in our lobby, and this was started by someone's yoga teacher who said, I've always wanted to do yoga at your museum. She corralled many of her yoga teachers, they all corralled their yoga classes, and we ended up with a huge event that we hope to repeat on a more frequent basis. The second lesson was that we can embrace fast, fun, and cheap. And that's really hard for an organization that takes several years to plan an exhibition and that has really high production values even for their children's guides. All of a sudden, we were having conversations on Tuesday that resulted in an event that happened on Friday. We had to trust our community members to get the word out to their communities and to deliver on their contributions. We had to find ways of getting the work done in our organization differently. This small, nimble team who worked with communities to co-create events were kind of working under the radar. Only security really knew what was happening at any one time. We very purposefully did not put these events into the machinery that is how we usually work. This caused some pretty significant culture clashes, as you can imagine, because a number of people didn't find out about what we were doing till after it was done, frankly. And it put some of our colleagues in a very awkward situation. So in marketing in particular, would get calls from the public wanting more information and they would know nothing about the event. So it took us some time to kind of find that balance between sharing and staying under the radar, and we're getting better at that. Another part of fast, fun, and cheap is that we learned that our idea of perfect is completely different than our audience's idea of perfect. They're much more relaxed about standards that we're very, very committed to. And finally, we learned that learning and entertainment are not actually opposite ends of the same spectrum, but two separate spectrums individually. Then the last and third lesson is that co-creation for us is authentic when it's co-learning. We had to be willing to learn as much from our community as we hoped that they would learn from us and from each other. This is an example of a crafting group of some young women that embroider that really wanted to come in and embroider under our really fabulous medieval tapestries. So they organized this entire event. We bought the supplies. They pushed the word out. So we posted it on our Facebook. That was the only place we marketed. They pushed out through their channels. And we ended up with 75 people coming that Friday night, so within 4 days, to do embroidery, to spend time really looking differently at the tapestries that they'd walked by a gazillion times. The audience was remarkable. There were older women for whom embroidering is a serious passion. There were families who came to do this together. There was an amazing number of young men in their 20s who wanted to embroider on different garments that they brought with them. There was beer and there was fun. So This is about next practices rather than best practices. It's about building meaningful relationships and connecting with new audiences. And we're using these 3 ideas: start with their passion, relax into fun, fast, and less expensive, and embrace being a learning partner in much that we're doing. So it's not our main way of working, but it is, as I liked your word, infect. It's starting to infect many of the things we're doing. Most people ask me, how do I know if it's making a difference? Well, we're doing a lot of evaluation. We spent a lot of time defining what success would look like. One definition of success was that what we call the fuzzy host, that people who happened upon these events would be somewhat unclear about, is this a Nelson thing, or did somebody come in here and just do this at the Nelson? Like, what's going on here? And this is an example of a chalkboard that we used to announce these events, and we tried to make the co-creator as prominent as the Nelson. But my favorite measure of success was that our local paper, in their best of issues, the best restaurant, best hamburger, best, they actually had to create a whole new category for us last year. They created the category best change of pace, and that was a real win for us. Thank you.